Welcome everybody to the start of a new video series, and as you may know, we have done discussion videos before for Seven Samurai and the Human Condition in my Asian film marathon, and this is going to be a start of the discussion series, which is going to involve me, Thomas, and my friend William, and we're going to basically talk about movies and not just singular films, but it could also be categories, certain topics to discuss, and this is going to be the part of our sci-fi series, which is going to involve talking about all the most iconic sci-fi films, such as
we're going to look into a wide range of sci-fi in the genre that make it so great, coming from Star Wars, the Blade Runner, which we're speaking about obviously today, even up to more recent releases like Interstellar. So we thought it'd be appropriately to begin with Blade Runner anyway.
Yeah, I mean, originally what we wanted to do was do a singular video talking about the most iconic sci-fi films, but we realised there's actually quite a lot of tentpole films throughout the past 100 years. We were going to do Metropolis, 2001, Blade Runner, and then we realised, hang on, we're leaving out all these other iconic films. So we're just going to do a series, and it's not necessarily going to be every week or every month, it'll just be whenever, and hopefully we get to dig into other sci-fi films after this. Before we start the review, I just want to say there will be spoilers in this review and discussion, and there will be some clips from it. Hopefully don't spoil it too much, but you have been warned, there will be some spoilers in here past the 10-minute mark. We'll first do a brief review of the film, and then we'll get into a pure discussion of scenes in the film and everything else that's in it. So without further ado, let's start talking about the plot.
Sure. Oh, sorry, just before the plot, we'll just mention the book adaptation.
Yes.
Yeah, it's I don't know how much of you have read it. We're yet to check it out, but the film is actually an adaptation by Philip Dick's book published in 1968 called The Android's Dream of Electric Sheep, and looks like an interesting read. So check that out if you haven't anyway.
Yeah, so just keep that in mind, everyone, if you're someone who has read the book and stuff, that we have not read the book, so we're not doing any comparisons, but I have heard things, I remember Mark Kermode, film critics, saying that it is actually quite true and accurate to the book, but we can't speak in that, and we're just going to talk about it in pure film terms. So
shoot on with the plot then, shall we?
Shoot on with the plot.
Right, the plot is we essentially have Deckard, played by Harrison Ford, who is a Blade Runner, also known as a bounty hunter, who is assigned to retire the remaining replicants from Nexus 8 who remain on planet Earth. And what a story that sort of ends up being. Shall we begin particularly with the sort of aesthetic we're introduced to as the film kind of goes on?
Yeah. Well, the plot is it seems quite simple on the surface. It's got a very simplistic plot. You've got this guy who has to kill these androids in their universe, and that's pretty much the plot, but it's a lot more complex than that. You've got all this different symbolism and all these different themes that are explored, and it would take I consider this my first viewing, and it was great to see it in the cinema, and I can talk more about that later as well, how we got to see it in the cinema. Technically that was my first time seeing it, and also we have seen the final cut, and we'll talk more about how many different bloody versions there is in the film as well. It's kind of ridiculous, because for real Blade Runner fans, I had to sit and go through all the different versions to kind of compare and contrast them. But we have seen the final cut, which is considered by many the definitive cut, but that is again argued and debated today.
Yeah, I think especially with the use of all these different cuts and just to kind of get this final complete version, even to see it on the big screen, kind of just made our experience that much better. I know that it's kind of over now. We can't really recommend it by the time this video comes out, especially for the UK viewers. I mean, don't we have the little booklet there?
Yes,
from our showing.
We went to see it in Queen's Film Theatre in Belfast. There maybe a couple of viewers who knows of Queen's Film Theatre in Belfast, and this is basically what it is. It was part of a BFI kind of project, basically where the Film Network plays it all over the UK. So it's like almost like a theme going on around the whole country of the same film playing. And they do that. This comes up quite often, stuff like this, where they play a film or a series of films, and they just play it around the UK in different cinemas. And GFT took part of this, and other places that took part was the Omniplex in Antrim, Kennedy Centre, Lauren, Newry and Derry, London Derry, and that's just in Northern Ireland and Ireland, but I'm sure it played a lot of other places as well. But yeah, it was just wonderful to see in the cinema.
And that was us kind of come back into it, because keep in mind before we'd both seen it previously, but to get back into it and see it on the big screen, final cut as well, just immaculate experience that really kind of gave us this inspiration to do this review, in order to sort of to get our thoughts and feelings out there. And now that we sort of delved into the plot there, and sort of, we're talking about how the story kind of thickens, from what we first talked about in that plot, in regards to things going on, those undertones and themes, such as morality and all these questions you can bring up because of the film and what it kind of represents. You have this, genre-wise, even you've got this noir inspired meets sci-fi into this sort of neo-noir masterpiece, and it becomes timeless through that, doesn't it, through the use of those conventions and the use of all these themes and how they kind of intertwine amongst each other. What do you think it makes it timeless, do you think?
The style in comparison to even imitators and anything that it has influenced, it is one of a kind. The cinematography is just unbelievable. 1982 is so groundbreaking, and we'll get into absolute detail later on about the cinematography and the special effects and the design. But overall, generally, you can see it's a very noirish tone, and you can see an influence in like most popular films like Batman Begins and The Dark Knight with that really gothic look. And you can even say that is an influence on Tim Burton's kind of style as well in the 1989 version of Batman, which kind of gave Batman this new dark gothic look in the city of Gotham. No coincidence there.
Stretches out of Hollywood, doesn't it, and the likes of Ghost in the Shell as well.
Yes, because
anime, yeah.
I mean, it's interesting to consider all the scientific influences and cinematic influences, everything, because everything that's made is always partly inspired or based on something that came before. I could say Blade Runner influenced Ghost in the Shell, and then Ghost in the Shell would have influenced The Matrix. And we're also skipping past films like Akira as well, which came out that time in 1988. So we've got that in between, which also influenced The Matrix. And then you've got The Matrix, which has been imitated and parodied, and it's been an inspiration to many modern films that tackle all those kind of cyber issues and technology, that look at technology. And The Matrix is one of the pinnacles as well of the late 90s. It was near the turn of the millennium, and it just goes to show the influence that the film had, and the style, not just the aesthetic of the story and the substance, but the actual style.
The style, that's something, even though it has all these sort of, films are taking inspiration from it, the style is truly unique, and something you can't replace. It just has that sheer uniqueness about it from the aesthetic, and it's true to Ridley Scott's craft, but I don't think he's ever had such a such a universe like this, like Blade Runner. It has
certainly is better. To me, it's some people might consider Alien a little bit better, but this is way on top of Alien for me. Ridley Scott, he does. I mean, I know some of his recent films aren't as good, but he's certainly a master, and this film is, absolute evidence of this, and not just on Ridley Scott's part, but on the special effects team and Harrison Ford for his performance and everything, and Rutger Hauer, however you want to say his name. But yeah, it was good. The style of the film, as we were talking about the influence and stuff, I can get into that more later actually, so I need to stop myself. But there's so many themes tackled in it, and I think on the surface it's hard to actually take in all the different themes that are going on, but really it's set in a dystopian future, and it's interesting the year it's set in, because in the book it's 2021, here it's 2019, which is 4 years from now, and it's always interesting to see that happening with films that look at the future, especially Back to the Future, which is, people have been shut up about it since this year began. It's the Back to the Future year, because the second film is based in 2015.
Now, you mentioned Akira earlier on, and the reason why I'm bringing that up again is because for it to be in 2019, it kind of comes across as almost a prediction for the future, and it comes up, Los Angeles 2019, and you're kind of brought into what appears to be this sort of, it looks more like Neo Tokyo, and the reason why that sort of prediction is happening, because there was Los Angeles, especially at that time, 1968. We got to keep in mind, especially for the book, is a lot more cultures were kind of coming in, and that was especially Asian culture, which is why you seen the sort of
the whole Chinese
billboard
thing,
and the pill and all these different things, and then the noodle bar and all these different Asian sort of
there's this coming in. I think that's almost a deliberate combination of Eastern and Western. You've got Eastern, which kind of represents, I'm only thinking about this now, kind of represents traditionalness and the old world. Then you've got the Western society who has progressed. So actually that's a very interesting link and dynamic already put in there, with the big huge buildings, and you've got this little noodle bar and the Chinese people, where it's kind of the culture seems to still be there, but it's completely overshadowed by the city and all the synthetics and mechanical machinery and buildings and stuff like that.
Yeah, it relates back to that sort of dystopian future where race didn't matter, where there's just this ultimate prediction of what they, that opinion at the time what the future might have been, and it wasn't necessarily a pretty sight. You had all this claustrophobia going on and all this, quite, bleak symbolism of, the woman taking the pill and all these things that would really set you into the mind state to fear the future, as opposed to welcome it. And you obviously had the symbolism of the flying cars and those, technological advances, are being used to the wrong vices, and the only sort of comeback then, for these humans is to eliminate the replicants who remain on Earth. And in terms of the number of replicants here on Earth, you gotta kind of question that, the sort of the Deckard conspiracy, and see if replicant or not. We don't want to delve into that too much because it's a whole conversation, on its own. But we could even talk about the sort of replicants and what their characters mean. I mean, the first replicant, who unfortunately I don't know his name, just looks like the sort of the average Joe, and I think that's an interesting use of character. This is man being examined. Is he a replicant or not? You couldn't pick him out of the crowd. Not really mysterious or in any way or that, or suspicious. Just a normal human. And I love the sort of use of dialogue to get that across. The sort of this vulnerability that those replicants had, and trying to mask their lack of emotion, for maybe over sort of subsidizing it, especially in the sort of conversation at the start, where he's brought in and examined and got those great shots of the eyes and the twitching. It's all very visceral, the visceral feeling you have going on, and it essentially ends with a gunshot, him getting up and resorting to violence. And this intense build up to begin with was an excellent start.
And it really is a crescendos at the very very opening. It's a very shocking moment because it just hits you. It kind of made me jumpy in the cinema with the sound and everything. The way it's so sudden, it happens so suddenly, and just in general, the film is just fantastic, highly influential. I mean, if you haven't seen Blade Runner yet, there's something wrong. Especially if you're a fan of sci-fi, it is one of the most iconic and famous films, I would say, and it's quite high up on the Sight and Sound list. It's the number one sci-fi list, I think. I can't remember what list it's on. It's number 63 or 69 on the Empire list, the top 300 or top 500, is it? But well, that kind of just says how influential and loved the film is. And it's interesting, I can talk about this in more detail later on, how the film wasn't very popular at the opening, in the first couple of years, and then very slowly it just started to grow this huge cult status, and all the themes and everything that's in it are still being discussed today. And it's always interesting to see a cult film. This happened with so many, where they just slowly build their audience, and I think the Blade Runner is going to speak to a lot of people for the next decade or 100 years.
There's no doubt its inspiration will continue on, and through that sort of cult status, it's sort of solidified its spot in sci-fi and neo-noir, history, and that's without a doubt. I think then if we sort of delve in more to the sort of cinematography and things that are brought into it that also help it give that sort of cult status in regards to how well it's made. It's not an easy thing to combine sci-fi and noir and make it into this universe. How did you think about these techniques there?
Yes, and before we dive into that, I just want to let you know this is now going to be where we discuss the film in more detail. So if you have not seen the film yet, be aware there's going to be a lot of spoilers here. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the cinematography, as Williams just asked me, and I think the cinematography in the film and the visuals in the film is one of the reasons that the film's lived on, and again that's cult status, and because the visuals are so groundbreaking, because it basically used everything that was available at the time. And we're not talking about digital technology, and the first thing everyone's going to say is, there wouldn't have been CGI, and like Star Wars and 2001, a decade before it, it would have been all these models and stuff. And I was reading up about this technique that they use where they filmed scenes like 16 times or something, and played them in reverse and everything to get this effect. I'm not sure what scenes, but they did that. They filmed scenes 16 times and had them overlapping or something like that for some of the... It probably would have been the flying car scenes and stuff like that, and it would have just been all these layers, and the effort and creativity and the craft just it generates the atmosphere so well, and it truly brings you into the film. And I think it's really the core of the film, and the great special effects by Douglas Trumbull, who worked on Silent Running, and he's a genius, because even in Silent Running, which came out in mid-70s, you can see that he's put a lot of creativity into the special effects, and they're very innovative as well. I think
Yes.
he might have been an influence for Star Wars, and I think he may or may not have worked on 2001: A Space Odyssey in some way. Maybe he shadowed someone. I'm not sure actually. I can't remember, but he's definitely an innovator, and you can definitely see this in Blade Runner.
You can indeed, and you know, in regards to the stylistics and the sort of techniques that are used, I mean, they even create that sort of neon dystopian atmosphere, and to get that across, you need someone like that. You need the work of a genius to kind of combine, you know, such genres and then put it off so well stylistically. I think even to set it out on its own, you're setting out onto a new creative task, that they think outside of the box and to really put, you know, yourselves and as well the audience into this completely different world, and it's certainly not an easy task. In regards to even the use of the camera angles and the camera in total is
The take
is monumental. Yeah, very tight, very claustrophobic at times, but there's also this looming city in the background. There's so much hustle and bustle going on, and the use of rain is so. I mean, we're speaking about that in the Seventh Summer review. It's just as monumental in this and is needed.
And rain's always really well used in films, and it's very effective here because it really gives that, you know, the glum, kind of depressing mood and atmosphere and tone.
Yeah.
Everything like that's all set up, and it's really surprising to think that this film, you know, almost got brushed off. You know, critics did like it, but it wasn't very popular at the time in 1982. And look how visual it is. Look how astounding. I mean, that would have surprised a lot of people when they saw it. How the hell did that you know, gain status quicker? Maybe I think it's one of those films that was really ahead of its audience, ahead of its time.
Certainly, yeah.
And that happens a lot. You know, it's because it's still kind of a Hollywood American film, and in American cinema you can see, you know, everything's more. I think it's a bit more ahead of its time in terms of it being really complex. And I don't think modern or casual kind of viewers were ready for that sort of thing. Obviously, you got the critics who would have been film buffs and stuff like that. But I think in terms of a mainstream, it wasn't a mainstream success because people just weren't into that kind of film at that time. But now things have changed. People are reflecting on the film, looking back at it, and just seeing how it's kind of predicted some things or kind of represents that build-up, paranoia, man versus machine. Those kind of core themes have been explored very early on in science fiction of the late 19th century and the early 20th century.
And that's
or 20, sorry, late 20th. No, I was right. Never mind.
Yes. And that kind of surprises me how that sort of cult status only adapted, you know, in later time, because I think those sort of questions that it brings up, the morality, the man versus machine, and all these themes that are appearing in the film, I think could have been, you know, regular sort of themes throughout the 80s in regards that, you know, going into different films, but also have this amalgamation into this one film, into, you know, Blade Runner. It really is surprising how it is ahead of its time but wasn't so well received back then. And even then there's a lot of things to speak about later, you know, in regards to the soundtrack and how it assists that, and then, you know, that very iconic final scene as well that needs to be, you know, discussed a million times, you know, to really give it justice.
Yeah, the final scene is really the scene that everyone is left with. It's the scene that everyone it gets stuck in everyone's head, and you kind of think of the themes and the ideas that the film explores. It wraps it all up really well. And I want to talk a bit more about the cinematography and the style of the film, just because of how fucking mind blowing it is to me. The tight close ups, the really dark, moody lighting, and it really makes you think of. It's a real combination of all these different noir films over the you know, the past 60 years leading up to it, because I read a great review on The Guardian why it's such a popular and timeless film. Is, you know, even the way the replicant that he has a romance with, that Harrison Ford character has a romance with, she's got these padded shoulders, which is a lot like, you know, these sort of 40s noir characters where the business women have these padded shoulders, and then you've got the whole use of the Venetian blinds, then you've got the moody, claustrophobic office-like space, you know, being filmed, showing that kind of dystopian future. And then you've got a combination of kind of 70s cop films as well, you know, gangsters and kind of detective stories, that moodiness to it. And I just think it's incredible visual style. It's combining all these different things but also being something on its own.
Absolutely, you take those conventions, even like the smoking and
The smoking
very
as well.
iconic as well in regards to even that. It's relates back to their sort of prediction for the future. You know, they're still smoking, they still have that sort of grasp on the noir films that led before, you know, Blade Runner's release, and then you've got, you know, even the sort of costumes that kind of meet in the middle between sci-fi and noir, and it's really, it almost seems quite experimental. I mean, there's one of the replicants was wearing the see-through sort of coat underneath her lingerie, and it was very bizarre, but very, you know, very a good effect, you know, that they have that sort of new look and prediction. It's very interesting.
It was almost like it was kind of a future retro look as well, because
neo-punk sort
it's
of
it's a bit like Clockwork Orange, where the style is a lot like the 60s, but it's also seems like it's ahead of its time. It's hard to explain without seeing the film, but some parts of the film you kind of has a vintage look to it, but it also looks really high tech and futuristic, and it has this kind of combination and contrast, very deliberate, of course, to create that atmosphere. And I guess that's kind of bringing the audience in to think, you know, the past and the present. You know, here we are in the future, and this is it's a combination of the old and the new.
Very true. You've got, you know, the past, the present coming intertwined. You've got all these cultures intertwined as well, and this sort of this future vibrance about it, but also those conventions from the past dragged in as well. And it almost is, it's unsettling. It doesn't have a exact point. It doesn't know what it is in a good way. You know, it's intentionally like that. It doesn't know where it's going, and it sort of shows that unpredictability for the future. And that's all drawn in and played out through all these different techniques, like the close up of the eyes and all this. It's stuck in a place, you know, but it has an abundance of what it contains, and it's really shown well through these techniques. And, you know, even leaning on to the soundtrack then and how that conveys those emotions.
Yeah, I mean, the soundtrack, I just absolutely love. I mean, as soon as I got home, I wanted to listen to the soundtrack, and I think it's just brilliant, an absolutely brilliant soundtrack, and I think it's one of the few soundtracks that really add to the film. Without the soundtrack, I don't think I would have enjoyed it as much, to be perfectly honest, because, well, that's debatable, because you can't really say.
Yeah.
But I thought the soundtrack really helped get you into this tone, because we're talking about the old and the new again. This is their name, what's his name? Valinguis.
Valinguis, yes. Yeah.
That's the name of the artist who's done other film soundtracks. But we're talking about the old and the new again. There's the use of synthesizers, but you've also got this very jazzy, you know, kind of like the love theme, for instance. It's very jazzy kind of tune, and there is some older tunes in the film, the sound older at least, and it's got that real combination of the old and the new.
Yes, that's one thing I wanted to touch on. Sort of the iconic 80s synthesizer use, and then the noir jazz kind of fused. It was like it's a fusion, the soundtrack, and sort of emotion that it sort of conveys. You know, you've got this beauty, you know, themes of love as well coming in the soundtrack that really add to, you know, the sort of replicant and human love between Harrison Ford and the female replicant. You've got that, and just that really ties in well with the atmosphere too. I mean, because it sort of takes the visual aside and really just gives it that ideal soundtrack, idealized, because it, you know, brings in both sides, brings in the noir, also sci-fi, and really just unravels that sort of world for you, and creates that new universe. You know, it's something bigger than a new world. It's universal, has all these universal themes coming into it.
Yeah, and then that makes you consider, you know, postmodernism, and for those that don't really know what this is, postmodernism, it is very hard to explain. It kind of started in the late 60s, 70s, whenever basically the idea is there's nothing left new to say anymore. Films like Fight Club and American Beauty demonstrate this very well, and Blade Runner is definitely a postmodern film, because you've got all these it's all this mix of genres, and it's also a pessimistic film about the future and how grim and dark it is. So postmodernism, in a way, it's kind of saying nothing left new to say anymore, and it kind of rejects ideas of progression. We've just gotten to a point where we don't know what came before, in a sense, and that's the whole idea with the replicants and everything. And the visual style is a real mixed bag, isn't it?
Yes, certainly is. You know, visual to that soundtrack as well. Again, to have that unique visual outlet, it is, you know, postmodern in the sense that, you know, what more can we explore, you know, what more can we see in cinema. But I think, you know, this being especially ahead of its time in regards to its visual outlet, having that warmth of the 80s feel, but also having that sort of vibrancy of the future, even if it is bleak, you know, melancholical, even if it is in that state, it's still a glimpse of something new for audience to see and to most importantly interpret. interpret as their own. You know, it's a prediction overall. It's a new world.
Okay, now I think it's time that we move on to sort of the themes of the film that are explored, and it's what would you like to start with?
Sure, we could begin with the human against machine. Most importantly, sort of the humanism theme coming in there. You know, in regards to who's human, who's a replicant. You know, we've got that question mark that's always looming in the background, and it also has a sort of your interaction of kind of looking and trying to notice those signs, that sort of twitch in the eyes to the sort of more mechanical ways, and it really does bring in the sort of emotion, the human emotion, and questions it. It doesn't explore it necessarily, it more so questions it and sort of plays with it, manipulates it in many ways. What did you think of that in particular, and the sort of use of the unknown and the humanist theme coming in?
It all becomes quite existential because you've got the Harrison Ford character. We see him playing piano, and we see all these pictures, you know, that suggests that is his previous life or something. You know,
that's the female photos too. Female on the other side.
Yeah,
you know,
the previous photos, it was maybe his wife, lovers, children, anything like that. So it's quite existential in the way you see him kind of drifting about. He doesn't seem to have any friends. He's got this mission he's doing, and it's almost like a search for humanity.
Yes.
Because the tentpole of the film is that romance he has with a replicant, and there's that bridge of who's human and who isn't, and then, you know, he's considering, you know, he's in love with this replicant, but he knows she's not human, she can't feel anything in a way, but, you know, it's hard to explain it. It's a really complex idea. It's a very, very complex idea, and it does all become very ambiguous and existential. And the humanism is all there as well, you know, just looking at the characters and the way he deals with everything in the film.
It does. I mean, he's flawed. He drinks. He you know, he has all these different things going on in regards to traits that would make him a human. I mean, he's rough as well, and he's this type of character that you can't necessarily relate to unless you like him, but you can kind of see, okay, this is you get the sort of impersonation of his life, and up to that point, and you see, you know, where he's now looking to go, as opposed to the sort of mystery behind the replicants, and they've got that a bigger mystique about them, you know, and wondering, you know, where have they been, and you know, because these are creations that, you know, have come to Earth that shouldn't be there, that have escaped, you know, from far away and have made their way to Earth, and they're kind of exploring that environment just like we are as viewers. And that was one of my favourite, you know, moments in the film, essentially, when we're trying to explore the sort of humanism going against machine, and this tackle and bereavement of emotions and how they, you know, get past each other, is a very complex but also, you know, very intriguing to see. I love the way they played it out, you know, through the techniques and even through the characterization, and the performances in doing so were second to none. You know, that's a theme in itself. It's so hard to explore and define, because it's quite, you know, you said existential, and as well it's quite it has a lot of ambiguity with it, you know, with what it's trying to explore, and it you know, it's a wonderful touch to the film, I think.
And there's also this whole big build up of paranoia, you know, man versus machine again, and as you said, they come from another place to Earth, and, you know, it's almost like they're considered immigrants in a way, and I think that might be some sort of criticism on America, and then, you know, that's something to be explored and debated, and that's something I'll have to really read into. And this is, I mean, from just one viewing, we're getting all this out of it, but there's still so much left to say, and we'll definitely come back to this film. But yeah, there's so much humanism and these core themes. And is there any other themes you could think of? You know, maybe we can talk about the end scene or something.
There's a plethora of themes you could, you know, rant on for days about. Like, you could even read in colonialism and things even so much, you know, more prior to, you know, his Aliens film. But, you know, colonialism aside, and even that humanity scene, for draw past that and then really explore themes that you know, even past the paranoia, we've got themes coming in. I lost my train of thought. Hold on. One of the primary themes then is gender, and how it's used in regards to this dystopian future, and how it is in this play. And I mentioned earlier on that the sort of race was eliminated, aside from the replicants against human. That is its own clash, you know. You mentioned the immigrant theory, that, you know, as far as we're concerned, may be true, and you can read into that. But gender especially, there's a different take on gender, And it's also intriguing to see in the future, the sort of Harrison's Ford character Decker and how he approaches, you know, female opponents. There's this. We're coming into the late 80s where there's a bigger empowerment of female protagonists and antagonists, and we kind of get that. Yeah, we certainly get that in this film. I mean, we see Deckard eliminate or retire, as it's referred to, a female replicant who is extremely strong and is essentially running through glass and running through the streets again. A very claustrophobic scene, but also quite haunting in that he's chasing this woman down who just kind of wants to live. I mean, there's the use of the animalistic coming in where she has her own snake and has no fear of it. All these stereotypes are kind of being pushed to the side, and this woman's being chased until she kind of meets her demise, and he shoots her twice. Sort of this robotic replicant woman is, and it kind of it's touched on further again down the line, but she's not human. She's taken away, even if it's a woman, even if it's a man, even no matter what it is, an animal or anything. It was a case of exploring gender in the future and then tying gender in with the replicants and then sort of experimenting with that, and that was interesting as well, seeing that scene. A phenomenal scene overall, but even more complex with that undertone of the female exploration.
Yeah, I didn't even think about gender that much in the film, but it certainly is there, and that's something I'll have to look into again. And that scene that you're talking about is probably one of my favourite scenes. It's just the way it's shot and filmed, and you kind of hold your breath when you're watching it. You've got the slow motion shots of her running through the glass and it smashes and everything, and it's just so dramatic. It's unbelievably dramatic, and because you're just wearing that see-through thing, whenever she gets shot, you see the blood kind of getting stained onto it. Now it really is. It's so theatrical. It's one of the most theatrical deaths I've ever seen, because she falls through the glass at the end. She's sitting on the sidewalk as people are walking by as they witness this happening, and it's a really iconic scene in the film, I think.
Yeah, and just to sort of conclude the gender roles and how that tied in a case of, again, we've got that noir meets sci-fi and the neo-noir. We've got both the noir women and the sort of more sci-fi based strength women who are sort of more explored upon being replicants. That empowers them to have that strength.
That shows the noir influence again, because you've got these noir films post-war. That's whenever these ideas of the woman being in work, because during the war effort, women started to work, and when the war was over, it was almost as if they didn't need women anymore. But a lot of women wanted to stay working, and then that's whenever this new whole you go on talking about this for ages, but really I can say in film you can see that they're trying to show women that are more empowered and women that are more dangerous, and that was the whole new thing at the time for noir in the 40s, late 40s, and then some 50s films too. Things like Double Indemnity, films like that kind of show that.
You're certainly
with gender. I mean, it refers to the gender.
You're certainly right to apply that in. Again, if we take another scene, where the first replicant is essentially pinned Decker up against a dumpster, and Decker's lover comes around and shoots him to eliminate him. Up until that point, she had no real power, even though dialogue scenes that took place when she was being tested before suggested that she was going to be quite different as a character in regards to her ability to speak and to also play off and to tease Deckard's character, but she's also empowered via the weaponry to eliminate one of her own as a replicant as well. And that sort of replicant killing replicant is another question, and I'm sure a lot of Blade Runner fanatics would get into. But aside from that, applying that only to gender, again, another fascinating sort of experiment or overview there with seeing that and empowering this woman through that use, because we don't see her strength. She doesn't adapt that. She is a replicant, but she doesn't adapt that strength that the rest of them do. She has a human trait to her as well, and you can see that she didn't enjoy shooting him. She had that emotion, and she has all these photos from the past as well. I love her character and how they played that out, which is phenomenal again. And we're talking about a lot of these scenes, but what about the actual final scene that really sets it all?
It's exactly what I was just going to say. We'll move into now. Okay, so discussing the ending of the film is probably my favourite part to talk about, and I think it is for most people that see the film, and it really leaves you with many questions on the philosophy of the film, and it really leaves you thinking. It depends what ending you see, and before I get into it, actually, there are different cuts. The theatrical cut and the director's cut,
Yes.
and the final cut, and the press cut, and then there's the bootleg cut or something. There's all these different cuts, and some of them have the narration, some don't. But the ending's different in the director's cut, I believe. I think there was stuff about the theatrical. I think it was the theatrical cut. They wanted the ending to be more the happy ending. They took the happy ending in the final cut, or the director's cut. I'm not really sure. I'm getting them all mixed up now. But the way the final cut ends, I think, is the nicest way to leave the film, and I love the way it leaves the film.
It leaves. It's more of an ambiguous ending, certainly, but it works very well. It ties in with the theme of the film.
It ties up.
It's a better ending.
It ties things up, but there's still a lot of ambiguity there.
Yeah.
And if you're talking about gender again, he gets the girl in the end technically.
Does,
so you've got that kind of, what do you say, genre play as well.
More of an unconventional.
Yeah, I mean, you've got Harrison Ford. He's just out of Star Wars, and he's going to do Raiders of the Lost Ark quite soon after. So he's almost like this iconic adventure hero. Like, he's playing on Hollywood genres where you've got the heroic figure, and he's almost he is properly the heroic figure. Instead of Princess Leia this time, it's this replicant girl that he gets. And that's the way that kind of ties up. But really what we want to talk about is Tears in Rain.
Rutger Hauer and his character is, body. This scene, that's all you can say. Really what we have in the end is, it's a mind-blowing, breathtaking, but also beautiful ending. I mean, leading up to it, the climax, that use of building, making their way to the roof, almost like a fucking King Kong ending hierarchy, getting to the top for this massive climax.
Let's play it. We'll cut it being played right now, so you can skip by whatever the time put on screen. So we're gonna play the last minute and a half of the final cut, the ending of the great speech.
I've seen things you people wouldn't believe.
And isn't it great? I mean, you have to agree, it's just a great scene.
Tears in the rain. Tears in the rain. It is. It's that speech in particular. It's Har's character. He's almost quite Shakespearean. It's like a poem at the end.
It's the accent and everything as well. He's so well spoken.
Yeah, he's well spoken. He's got his shirt off for all you ladies out there, and he's. There is one important question drawn in at the end, and this is what I guess took most from the film, and that was, if we reverse those roles and Deckard, was on top with his gun, and Barry was hanging off the edge, I think without a doubt, 100 times out of 100 times, Deckard would let him fall, shoot him off. But what we have there is the real tie-in of the thing, humanity against machine. If you switch that round, it's almost a criticism of humanity and this greed and this sort of lust, where he lets him live, do so horrifically with a nail and a spike, and lifts him up, but he lets him live and almost becomes more human than Deckard, and defeats that sort of.
And I think that's probably the most fascinating bit, because it's incredibly. Whenever you told me that, I think it's fantastic. It's really made me reflect on the ending and the entire philosophy. Yeah, you've got this robot who's become more human than the Deckard character, and I think that is probably it's a mix of optimistic and pessimistic that it's just hard. What do you explain first? It's optimistic in the sense that artificial life can now be so human, it's not gonna hurt anyone, it's gonna be really nice. But it's pessimistic in the sense that the bridge between reality and robotic is no longer visible, because they become so human that it's almost scary. I think it's all about that paranoia of not being able to trust a replicant. I think there's a quote in it: "Never to trust a robot."
And even the way they're treated, to retire them, is to kill them, and they're almost this different species that shouldn't be treated humanly. But that last scene really solidifies them as and
that's the grand
just as human.
That's the grand sci-fi theme that was even explored 100 years ago in H.G. Wells stories, where it was, don't trust the machine. technophobia, that whole build up of man versus machine and people being
Yes.
paranoid and worried about machines taking over. And this was something that was being worried about in the 20s, the 30s, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, and it's still
Yes.
being
Even to
explored today. You know, we've got devices like flipping Blackberries and iPhones and all
Ex
that kind of
Machinima,
shit.
you know,
You've got
films
the
like
recent
that.
Ex Machinima.
Yeah,
It's just
they're
all
coming out.
there's so much stuff going on with the. And I
Yeah.
think they're really popular themes because they keep questioning progression, science, and
Yeah.
all those things. All the things that postmodernism's about criticising, because we're getting so far now. It's almost hard to see what came before and how we could even get much further than we are now. And it's quite scary to think what's
Yes.
next, because we might get to a point where it's uncontrollable, and that's what it's all about. But let's
It
focus
has
on
that.
let's focus on talking about the ending.
Yes, and even just to conclude all the rest of before it, you know, that idea of the robot killing creator, again talked about there, and even Roy Hart's character's gone through a lot in this film, and even lost, a lot too. I mean, we see a lot of trial tribulation for his character, and then that sort of build up for him as well. We almost draw a line of sympathy in the end, when he does sort of spells the poem and then
Yeah.
has his cry in the rain.
And
It's almost like an Oedipus moment, where he's just defeated, but also he's won in the sense that he has overcome this, all these conventions, and really just got the last win in the end by saving, Deckard, and showing, I'm more human than
yeah,
you are.
because he realizes that at
Yes.
that moment, it's not going to change anything, and it's a really poignant scene because of the
thought-provoking.
transformation he's went through.
Mm.
And I can't even remember what I was going to say now.
Well, even if we continue on speaking about the final scene, it might, come back to you. I think, like we're talking about, that last drawing was an excellent way to sort of end that despise between both, and fuck's sake, this last scene is one that will make you lose your train of thought.
I'm still trying to think. It's really annoying. I don't know how it happens.
Yes.
It's there and then it just disappears.
I don't know. Are we replicants?
Anyway, back to the ending. I'm still lost for words, but
Me too. We're lost for words.
the ending represents so much
Yes.
to the film, and it really questions everything. And I think it's something you can take a lot of interpretations from as well.
You certainly can. There's so much to interpret in the end, and it could tie audiences in with who they want that victory to be towards. Some might have the more sympathy for, because it's not like this build up is a straight conventional protagonist versus antagonist. It's really mixed, and there's flaws on both sides, and it really is just a sort of spectator's trial of what you're going to see, and how you're going to see it. It's so unpredictable, whatever way it could have went. It just I kind of had that feeling inside. I felt it in my stomach. The visceralness of it, and the raw emotion that was there, and just this brutal battle, and horrific. Ties into sort of horror scene.
Yeah, I remember what I was going to say
Yes.
now. I was going
Great.
to talk about how the film doesn't really have an antagonist or a protagonist,
Mm.
because once you get to that conclusion, you start to see from Barry's point of view,
Yes.
almost, and that's when he becomes humanized, and it's a very
Yes.
poignant moment. You see his perspective. He's broken down. He just wants to be human at this point,
Mm.
and realizing that he knows when he's going to die, or or if he's going to get retired. He knows that as a machine he only works he's going to live to a certain point, a lot shorter than the human's going to be living anyway, and that's really sad as well, knowing when you're going to die. It's existential again.
Again, that's a very human trait, isn't it? To think like that.
Yeah.
You wouldn't think a robot would be worried about such faults or
And
be programmed
in that
to.
moment, you realise he didn't want to really kill anyone or hurt anyone.
Mm.
He just felt, that Harrison Ford's character had robbed him of his of
Yes.
living. But so there really is no bad guy in the film when we get to that point.
It really isn't. It's just
It's almost like the role reversal screwed away. Now you're starting
Absolutely.
to think Harrison Ford's the bad guy, but really, it's kind of a neutral kind of thing, and then that
is.
questions again that there's human flaws everywhere.
absolutely, yeah, it really is. That's what they ended on, essentially, the human flaws between them, and this bittersweet ending of it was a conclusion almost, like it could finally be settled, that Deckard was essentially wrong, and that Barry was wrong as well. There was no right in the end. It was just this mutual loss of sides, and then quite pessimistic in regards to, but also a very beautiful, like I said, bittersweet, very bittersweet ending. Ended very well.
So after talking about the film so bloody much, I didn't think it was going to go on for this. I expected it to go on for half an hour, and I don't know what it's going to be like until I edit it. I think it's at least 45, 50 minutes. But I think now we can kind of wrap things up.
We can indeed.
Anything else to say?
Well, final thoughts on it. It's a classic for me. 5 out of 5. Phenomenal film. One of my favorite sci-fi. Next to Space Odyssey, from Kubrick himself. I think especially that ending, speechless towards the end. We're kind of just revisiting now in this conversation. It's been a great one. So thanks for having me on.
Always, and I hope you join us on the series again once we do more videos. And I would love to hear suggestions of films you think we should go on to discuss in terms of science fiction, or other ideas that you have that you'd like to see us do, because we've got a lot in store this summer and for the future or whatever. And really, thanks for watching, everyone. If you haven't seen the film and somehow you managed to watch this whole video, go out there and see the film. I command you to see the film, and if you've seen it, go see it again.
And if you're a replicant,
watch it also. I also bought the Blu-ray.
No difference.
I bought the Blu-ray edition of it, and it's a really
No
cool
difference.
edition. I'm going to do a video on that separately next week or something, and look at this big box set. It's the Final Cut Blu-ray version, 4-disc. It's got all the versions actually, and it comes with a little model of a car or something as well, and a booklet and all.
You'll
So
play with that.
yes, I'm gonna have fun with that. It's gonna be my new favorite toy, and I'm gonna do a video unboxing that and kind of not reviewing the film, but just saying, look at this shit. And I want to rewatch it. I think it's gonna be one we'll come back to again.
Oh, certainly.
Once we watch it another few times, I think we'll do another one of these videos. A lot shorter, probably could be longer.
Yes.
Who knows? And this could be in 6 months' time. This could be whenever. But there's more that I'd like to talk about once I get to see the special features and everything and get a more thorough look at it, because this is all just from one viewing. And overall, everyone, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video. Thoughts below on the film. Would love to hear what you think. Interpretations of the ending and whatnot. Anything final to say?
Tears and rain. Ladies and gentlemen, tears and rain.
There you have it. Goodbye, everyone. See you next time. I've seen things you wouldn't believe.